This story begins with a simple young man, Oliver, who was orphaned early and his life did not seem remarkable. He didn't receive a proper education, so he worked part-time at a convenience store, a life that didn't make him happy. A sullen and taciturn guy simply repeats his daily routine. But there is one fact that distinguishes him from the rest. Oliver has been seeing the same dream every night for 17 years. This fact might frighten anyone, but not him, because sleep was the only place where he felt truly alive. The first time this happened was when Oliver was still living in an orphanage. At first, the boy did not understand that he was dreaming. The dream was so real. In his dream, he found himself in an unknown dimension in which there was an amazing building. The little boy entered this building without even thinking about what might await him there. He was as if possessed. At the entrance, he was met by a stranger in a fox mask who called young Oliver a newcomer. The stranger showed him the way to the banquet hall. Ahead, he saw a stone table at which everyone present wore masks. And they were all playing the game, throwing dice and choosing their characters, when suddenly a girl in a fox mask interrupted them and announced that a new player would be joining them. In the dream, Oliver became an adult, wore a mask and clothes unfamiliar to him. One of the game's participants greeted Oliver and invited him to sit next to him. The masked girl sitting opposite him became interested in Oliver and asked his name, and the protagonist decided to answer her and gave his nickname. From then on, everyone called him a snowman. The image and mask suited him, and no one asked any unnecessary questions. Addressing Oliver by a pseudonym, the girl in the fox mask offered to create a figure for him to control. The main character was surprised by this. A system window appeared in front of him, which offered him to choose a profession and character attribute. The snowman thought everything that was happening was just a dream, so he decided to give it a try and chose a magician with the frost attribute. A player sitting nearby remarked that this was a very bold choice for a first game, but he only liked it. So everyone made their choice, the game began, one of the participants began to roll the role-playing dice. On this day, the first snowman game began. Everyone present was clearly enjoying what was happening, as if they had long been accustomed to it. But soon the game came to an end. It's Oliver's turn. He needs to fight off the monster's attacks by rolling the dice. The system window gives him 4 options for the development of events. Without thinking twice, the snowman chooses the third option, to bind the monster's legs with frost magic. Other players in the game noted that despite this being Oliver's first game, he was doing a great job. As the game continued, everyone took turns rolling the dice and making their choice, fighting their characters against the monsters and wanting to win. When the participants defeated the monsters, their adventure ended. The masked girl announced the end of the evening and asked if everyone was satisfied with the world of eternity. Thus, Oliver learned that he had visited the world of eternity. He truly enjoyed the game, because in this game, the fate of the piece depended on luck and the strategy of choice. All the participants were pleased. They couldn't believe that they were able to enjoy just a trial game, and one of those sitting at the table was already calling the snowman for the next game. Oliver didn't think long about the answer, because there was no point in thinking about an ordinary dream and who these people were. So he immediately agreed, and from that very moment, the snowman came every night to the world of eternity. The main character told the children from the orphanage about his night adventures, but no one believed him. Everyone thought he was crazy. Because of this, children began to avoid Oliver. He became a loner, who was labeled a cheater. The main character escaped into the world of eternity every night, waiting for the next game. He has been playing for 17 years now. Having fallen asleep and once again finding himself in the world of eternity, the hero was already welcomed because he had proven himself to be a good player and partner. Of course, Oliver, over the course of these 17 years, had wondered who he was playing with, and even assumed that the people in masks were gods. But he was afraid that the magic of sleep could be destroyed if he tried to find out their secrets. The snowman was a good player. Everyone wanted to get him on their team, of course. This flattered Oliver, but he didn't show it. Suddenly, the man in the lightning mask reminded him that the snowman had not finished the sage's adventure, so he would not be able to play with anyone. The participants crowded around the snowman were upset, but did not lose heart. They supported the main character and retreated. The goal of the game was Ascension, the road to heaven, the final adventure of the world of eternity. Over these 17 years, Oliver created several legendary characters and almost reached the top of the world. So other participants considered the snowman their idol. But like everything in life, the world of eternity has also come to an end. The trial version of the game will be completed today, and the official release will begin soon. All the participants were aware of this, so they wanted to achieve ascension on the last day of the game. Oliver was upset by this fact because if he had a little more time, he would have definitely created the unique 31st figure, his final creation. But the girl in the fox mask asked everyone not to be upset, because tomorrow will be the official release, and dreams will come true. Listening to the conversation of his fellow players, the snowman noticed that they often talked about divinity and insects. He did not understand what it all meant, but he never asked unnecessary questions. But now he didn't have time to think about such things. The snowman had one goal, to achieve ascension. So taking the dice in his hand, he began the game. In 17 years, only 9 out of 30 figures have reached this stage. Today is the last chance to reach the top of the world. The last throw, but unfortunately, today luck is not on the side of the main character. He got a 1. His character was struck by magical feedback. The character, Milan, was unable to climb the ladder and achieve ascension. The snowman was defeated. Oliver's comrades, who witnessed his collapse, tried to calm the boy down. They understood that this was his 10th attempt, and it had ended in failure. The snowman missed his last chance to get to heaven, and hanging his head down, he became disappointed in himself. Thus ended the world of eternity that the main character had enjoyed for 17 years. But suddenly the light illuminated everything around. The game is not over yet, it is just beginning. The protagonist found himself face to face with his fellow gamers, and they then discovered that he was a human, an insect who had been deceiving them all this time, posing as a god. The masked gods were shocked by this news. They did not expect such a development of events. The snowman enjoyed the peace of eternity, but now he himself became a pawn of the game. Having learned this, the gods could not calm down and immediately ordered the capture of the imposter. Putting a collar on Oliver, they captured him. The main character could not understand why his former partners were treating him so cruelly. The gods were stern. They could not believe that for so many years man had stained the heavens with his presence. Oliver did not want to die. He resisted and tried to free himself from the shackles of the gods. Having directed his power at the young man, the god in the lightning mask was about to kill him. Suddenly, another god intervened. He looked different, was calm and reasonable. It seemed as if everything was going according to his script. The silver-haired god, Corden, stopped the execution. He often appeared in the world of eternity and was one of the influential players. Coming closer to the gods, Corden proposed a more humane method of revenge. The gods were not happy with the proposal, Cordona. They saw no point in it. But Corden was not as merciful as he seemed. He planned to send Oliver to the lands where the dreams of the gods would become reality, so that he would die like a worm, becoming a victim in the name of madness. Hearing this, Oliver felt a strong sense of fear. He did not want to be a victim. His life was already full of sadness, and now this. Corden had no intention of saving the protagonist. He wanted to cause him as much pain as possible. Already in despair, Oliver began to hear someone's voice. He did not understand who this voice belonged to, but he knew for sure that only he could hear it. Communicating with the young man telepathically, Corden explained the entire situation and that today, Oliver's world would change. As a merger of the worlds, the human and the world of eternity would occur. Because the gods have chosen madness instead of faith to restore their powers, all the labors and history of humanity will be sold for madness. It will help the gods to restore themselves. Oliver didn't understand what was happening, and Corden continued his story. According to Corden, the snowman has only one chance to save humanity, and that is to reach the final adventure, which the snowman failed. After these words, Corden approached the prisoner and sent him to the ground. Now Oliver will have to be a pawn in the hands of the gods and try to save his world. The gods watched Oliver, their gaze never leaving him as he flew to his death. Oliver survived, which shocked him, as he had assumed. These were real gods. They did not just exist in his dreams, but were material. The main character found himself in an unfamiliar place. It was too dark. He couldn't see anything. Suddenly, everything was illuminated by light. The world of eternity merged with the human world and formed a new world, Pangaea. A completely different world appeared before Oliver. Now it was more like a game with castles and rocky terrain. The main character was very surprised by such beauty, but still could not believe that it was reality. Suddenly, a familiar system window appeared in front of him, notifying the player that 7,900,000 more players had joined the game. Finding himself again in an unfamiliar place, Oliver, as in the world of eternity, had to choose a character and attributes. Around him, the protagonist notices more silhouettes of people who were also about to choose a character, and only Oliver understood that they were about to embark on a difficult journey. Oliver sank into despair. Corden had not deceived him, the worlds had truly united. He needed to not just go through an adventure, he needed to save the world. Sad memories filled the protagonist's head. His fate repeated itself. Having found new friends, they immediately turned away from him, having learned that he was human. Oliver could not stand this. Anger took hold of him. Now he will use all the experience he has gained over 17 years. He will become a unique 31st figure and reach the gods. The world of Eternity is no different from tabletop RPGs. This game allows you to create something specific and unique, and the starting items change a lot. Having absorbed the knowledge of many years of gaming experience, Oliver creates a shadow summoner and begins the game under his previous alias, Snowman. The first adventure is chosen randomly. The main character was prepared for this, and he knew how to complete all the first adventures, so he was not afraid of the ruins of the Forgotten Moon. But Oliver was worried, since the ruins were full of traps, and he didn't have a thief in the group and the skill to disarm traps either. It won't be easy, but he'll have to move forward because there's no choice. The main character moves forward, noticing familiar places. He reached the entrance to the ruins of the Forgotten Moon and sees a familiar picture. He is faced with a choice: open the door or pull the lever. The system window appears again in front of the young man, with hints. But Oliver has memorized all the rules over these 17 years. Even though this was a trial version, something could have been changed in the release. It's good that much remained familiar to him. The protagonist completed the first task and safely opened the gates to the ruins. As he moves on, he approaches the next test, which he also remembers, so he is not worried about passing it. The essence of the trap was to solve a riddle that would give a clue in what order to step on the tiles. Oliver remembered everything, so all he had to do was repeat the correct sequence, and then he would be able to pass safely. Looking at the tile, he collected his thoughts and once again went through the sequence in his head: lion, wolf, moon, and sheep. After taking a couple of steps, the protagonist was convinced of the accuracy of his memories, so his next steps were confident and quick. Having passed the test, the young man exhaled and straightened his shoulders. This task seemed easy to him. He did not stand in one place for long and continued on his way. Ahead of him was a dark corridor. It seemed as if ghosts lived there. A frightening atmosphere filled the entire space. Walking a little further, Oliver again stumbles upon a familiar place. This was the next test that demonstrated the essence of the ruins. But the young man was still surprised. He had never thought about how long this path was. The system window appeared again in front of the main character, offering a choice of tiles that the young man could step on: red, blue, or black. Suddenly, his gaze falls on the wall. He looks at himself and notices what a clear mark remains on his neck. The black stripe on his neck looked like a collar, a scar left on him by the god in the lightning mask. Oliver remembered his former friends who betrayed him. He hated them and thirsted for revenge. But now is not the time to think about it. He needs to pass the test. Oliver decided to rely on his luck and took the first step. Having stepped on the red tile, nothing happened. The young man calmed down a little and continued on his way. But when he stepped onto the blue tile, he was defeated and activated a trap that dealt him a sudden blow to the arm. After experiencing extreme pain, Oliver looks around and notices that nothing is shooting at him from the wall anymore. The test becomes not only dangerous, but also interesting, and Oliver's spirit of adventure awakens. At this time, the sound of coins ringing in the heavens was heard. The gods were not only watching the main character, but also placing bets on his life. Continuing his test, the young man did not stop. He was already all wounded, since the traps were activated as soon as he did not guess. But this did not stop him. Oliver moved forward. Stopping for a second, the young man thought about which tile to step on. This time he chooses the blue one and takes a step forward. The gods watching the poor guy only laughed, because it was the wrong choice. The trap was activated again and caused damage to the young man. There was still a long way to go. It seemed like this test would never end. The protagonist could no longer make mistakes, because if he received such damage to his body again, he would be crushed. But Oliver had already solved the riddle of the gods and began to confidently move forward without mistakes. The protagonist passed the test and managed to survive, but the gods who watched Oliver's progress were unhappy that the guy was able to solve the riddle so quickly. Upon completion of the test, a golden chest containing a reward appeared before the protagonist's eyes, but he had no intention of opening it, as he had a chance to receive much more. He did not miss the chance and confidently continued his way through the ruins. The gods were stunned by Oliver's decision. They considered him a masochist, because the next test was not even close to the previous ones. But the main character was confident in his abilities. He was already standing in front of the door behind which was the lunar square. He was once again faced with the choice of ignoring the warning or surrendering. But the young man already knew that he would never choose the second option, so he opened the gates of the lunar square. Oliver entered, and before him stood a noble knight, kneeling, leaning on his sword. As soon as the Moon Knight noticed the young man, he immediately pointed his sword at him and prepared to attack. Moon Knight Karuna couldn't forgive Oliver for such arrogance. He prepares to kill the protagonist for entering. The protagonist had already met Karun when he played the trial version of the World of Eternity. Even there, many could not pass this test. The tiles on the floor of the lunar square were the only way to pass the test. The colors and order were important. Oliver remembered that the order remained the same, and the colors gave the tiles different magical effects. In this way, my main character will defeat his opponent and pass the test. Continuing his way across the red tiles, Oliver diminished the Moon Knight's aura and slowed him down. But the effect of the red tiles can be stacked up to 3 times. Now it's the turn of the black tiles. They activate a device that will deal damage to Karun. Moon Knight is under attack, but his moon defense increases with attacks, so Oliver will have to continue along the red path to remove the protective aura. This is a working tactic that will help the protagonist defeat the enemy and pass the test. But it wasn't that simple. The Moon Knight wasn't going to give up and prepared to attack, using his ability, Moonlight Slash. Oliver knew all the knight's moves, having faced him many times, and he also knew how to escape Karun's deadly attack. Using the moonlight, the protagonist repelled the knight's attack and managed to survive. The gods were indignant, as the test for beginners could not have been so difficult. Oliver was able to solve this puzzle. He did what the gods could not do. The young man was not only resourceful, but also lucky, so using his tactics, he was able to defeat the Moon Knight and win the test. Karun was all wounded and bleeding. The battle was over. The defeated knight asked the master for forgiveness, because he was unable to fulfill his mission. After the victory, the system window appeared in front of Oliver again, notifying him of the completion of the test. Looking at the lifeless body of the defeated man, the young man remembered the old days when he was still a player, and was looking for a way to defeat Karun. No one believed in him then, but he still managed to find a way to defeat the Moon Knight. Oliver originally planned to defeat Moon Knight because he is a shadow summoner, so as soon as he won, he used his power on Karuna. Now Karuna's shadow will serve Oliver, but the shadow did not receive all of the knight's power, but only 20%. After completing the ruins perfectly, more and more gods became interested in Oliver, and now it's not just his enemies who are watching him. Oliver was a good host, so after summoning the shadow, he greeted the new Karun. It's time to open the lunar chest, which contains not only experience for leveling up your character, but also a couple of interesting items. Oliver gave the moonlight sword that fell from the chest to Karun. For himself, Oliver took the moon staff, which gave additional characteristics to wisdom, which is exactly what the main character needs. But the most valuable thing that fell to the young man was the lunar seed, which he did not even hope to receive. Having completed the inspection, Oliver continued on his way, heading off to meet new adventures. A pillar of light illuminated them and transported them to a new location where a new event would take place. The second test was called the Five Brothers, and its essence was to weaken the orc tribe by any means necessary and kill at least one leader of the tribe. Oliver was familiar with this test, so as soon as he arrived at the scene, he began to think about completing the task. There was just one thing that bothered the hero. This task was designed for a group of people, but there was no one else besides him. The time given for the task was short, and it was time to move on. The strangest thing was how much time Oliver was given to complete the task. Last time the time limit was 6 hours, but this time it was less than 30 minutes. Deciding not to waste time, the young man went straight to the tribe. Looking around, he noticed that the orcs had hung out a green flag. The guy knew the game's plot and understood what it meant, but he began to become increasingly worried about what was happening. Suddenly, Oliver looked up and saw a horrific sight of all the dead being impaled on spears. The main character was left alone and he couldn't afford to lose heart, so he collected his thoughts and began to develop a strategy. Oliver already had a plan in his head. The world of eternity always reacts differently to the actions of people in adventures, so if his plan works, he will write a new story. So the first option was to attack the orc houses one by one, but that's very dangerous even with Karun. The second option was to wait until night to attack the orcs, but even with a group it would be difficult to do, so the second option did not suit Oliver. Therefore, the main character chose the third option. He decided to look around and gather information. First of all, the young man is interested in the exile of the Rocky Mountains. All in these mountains there are 5 peaks. On the highest one there is a tribe, the Stonefang. To begin with, Oliver decided to find the hidden key of this adventure, the exile. The protagonist remembered that he was hiding at the foot of the lowest peak. Continuing his search, the young man stumbles upon a trap in the form of bells. At first glance, they are small but very loud. Apparently, a spell has been cast on them to warn of an intruder. Suddenly, someone's voice came from the bushes. Oliver turned around and headed straight towards them, because he knew for sure that the same exile was sitting in the bushes. Noticing the young man's approach, the exile immediately tried to stop the guy, but he assured him that he was not dangerous. Coming closer, Oliver noticed a small straw hut standing nearby. This is where the exiled orc lived. The orc did not trust the man and did not want to come out of his hiding place. He suspected the guy and considered him a spy for the tribe. Oliver was once again faced with a choice, and the system window notified him of this, offering 5 possible scenarios: justify yourself, intimidate, ask for help in extermination, learn witchcraft, or try to figure out what was wrong with the orc. Oliver decided to try to find out what was wrong with the orc. He started a dialogue with him, and finally, the exile showed up. From the dialogue, it became clear that the wounds on the orc's body were caused by an illness. Since this disease is contagious, he was expelled from the tribe. Oliver wasn't afraid of the disease. He decided to come closer to hear the orc better. The latter was worried about the guy. He didn't want to infect him. Then, the outcast invited the protagonist to his house. He let down his guard and gave Oliver a chance. The young man followed his plan. He needed to gain trust, and it seemed he was succeeding. All this time, the gods who were watching Oliver could not calmly watch as the young man approached the dirty orc. For the gods, this was terrifying. Entering the house, the guy looked around and noticed a stack of books. Everything looked interesting and unfamiliar to him. He couldn't even imagine that orcs read too. Having offered tea to the young man, the orc began to tell about himself. From the story, one can understand that the orc was exiled when he was still in his mother's womb, because at that time their tribe was overtaken by an epidemic and all those who fell ill were sent into exile, including his mother. The orc's mother begged the elders to accept her unborn child, but the elders refused her. Then the mother became angry. She hated her tribe and wanted it destroyed. The orc wanted to be cured and get rid of his suffering. He studied many books and even learned that his disease could be cured if he had all the necessary ingredients for the medicine, but he could not get them himself. Then Oliver decided to help the orc and get all the necessary ingredients for him. The orc sitting in front of him was surprised by such kindness of the guy, but the main character wasn't going to do this out of the kindness of his heart. He decided to make a deal with the orc, and then the hidden adventure, Abandoned, was activated. The orc was not afraid of such conditions. He wanted to be cured, so he bowed low and agreed to the deal. So, the main character went in search of the missing ingredient, activating a hidden task, and the timer was also activated. Oliver was attracted not only by the deal with the orc, but also by the reward of a hidden quest, upon completion of which the young man could receive an NPC assistant. Time was running out. As was the day, the protagonist climbed a rock in the hope of finding the necessary ingredient. But upon reaching the top, he found himself faced with only an empty rocky area. The gods did not take their eyes off the hero and were already disappointed in him, because they did not understand why the young man had taken on this task at all. Approaching the edge, Oliver looked around and the system window appeared in front of him again with options for the development of events. Wait, search the area, return, check whether the environment is suitable for the required ingredient, and the last 5th is unknown. The young man decided not to make any hasty decisions, sat down on the ground, and began to wait. He recalled how he first entered the world of eternity and his first character. Back then, he was intrigued by the hidden test of the Abandoned One and wanted to quickly find the necessary ingredient. So he chose the option to search the area, but it was precisely because of such a hasty decision that his first character died. At that moment, the still very young Oliver was overcome with a feeling of sadness and melancholy. The death of the character upset the little boy so much that he remembered it for a long time. But it is precisely because of this that the current Oliver can achieve success. He was in no hurry, he simply waited, because the time was almost here. Suddenly, there was a loud sound. The tree began to fall, and some small bush appeared from it. The young man was expecting exactly this, so as soon as he noticed what was happening, he used his ability, Shadow Hand. Shadow Hand is a basic shadow summoner skill that creates hands with little physical strength. Using his skill, the protagonist carefully grabbed the bush and began to pull it out. At first glance, it may seem easy, but the main character had to try hard to carefully pull the bush out of the rock. The task is completed. The protagonist has obtained the necessary ingredient and can now go to the orc. But unexpectedly for Oliver, something started to shine on the branch. At first, the young man thought he was imagining it. But after some time, a system window appeared in front of the hero, which notified him of the start of another hidden task. A pocket watch without an owner. The essence of this task is to find someone in the city of Kongori who recognizes this watch. While Oliver was taking the watch from the branch with the help of his shadow ability, the gods did not stop talking. They were all discussing the main character and no longer saw him as a newcomer. The gods knew nothing about the hidden pocket watch quest, so they immediately turned to the game manual. But even there, nothing was written about this quest. At this time, the orc sat by the fire and waited for Oliver. He thought about whether it was possible to trust and believe a person. After some time, all wounded, the young man finally reached the exiled one's lair along with the necessary ingredients. The exiled one was very surprised that the man fulfilled his promise and returned. The orc was so grateful that he began to bow at Oliver's feet. After being given a ray of hope, the orc wanted to know the name of his savior. Oliver introduced himself by his nickname, Snowman. The exiled one also decided to introduce himself. Now Oliver knows that the orc's name is Michael. Michael was overwhelmed with emotion. He would never forget the snowman's kindness. Now the orc was indebted to Oliver, so he would help him in any way he could. The orc has fully recovered. He is ready to help the snowman in any matter and will fulfill his part of the deal. At this moment, a system window appeared in front of Oliver, which offered 4 possible developments, but only one was suitable for the main character: to destroy the tribe from within. Having voiced this to Michael, he immediately began to think about ways to infiltrate the tribe. He just had one idea. That night was the harvest festival, and each member of the tribe had to drink the blood of an animal from a huge cauldron. Michael suggested to the snowman that he mix some preparations into the orc's cauldron that would greatly help in carrying out the plan. While picking up the flasks, Oliver continued to worry about his assistant. He didn't want anything to harm Michael. But Michael convinced the snowman that now his only desire was to fulfill his mother's request to destroy the tribe. After this, Michael burned down his hut and left, taking with him only the medicine for the disease and a book with many blank pages. Oliver completed the task, helped the exile, received a reward and a couple of titles, being lonely on his own and an attractive creature. It was time to take action. Sitting near the tree, Oliver thought over the plan again and also looked at the containers with liquids. Red, the elixir of camouflage; blue, the elixir of madness. Having collected his thoughts, the protagonist drinks the red elixir. Now it will not be difficult for him to penetrate the lair of his enemies. After drinking the elixir, the snowman turned into an orc. He immediately headed towards the tribe. At the entrance, he was met by 2 guards who reminded him that he was not allowed to leave the village during the festival. The hero easily passed the guards in the guise of a troll and immediately went to look for a cauldron to pour the blue elixir into it. The cauldron is somewhere inside, so Oliver penetrated into its depths. Finally, he found a cauldron in which the blood of animals was already boiling. He immediately noticed that this place was the most guarded in the tribe. Oliver's plan was to pour the elixir into the cauldron disguised as animal blood, but the guard refused. Then the protagonist decided to say that it was the blood of a blue dragon. The guard immediately agreed, because the members of the tribe believed that with the help of this blood, the tribe could receive the blessing of Tranktid. The guard immediately went to the head, knelt down, and presented the special blood. The head of the tribe looked at his subordinate and, without thinking twice, accepted the vial of dragon blood. But before adding blood to the cauldron, he needed to personally verify that the blood was real. Having opened the bottle, the headman smelled a sharp smell of blood. Now he was sure of the contents and gave his consent for the blood to be added to the cauldron. The orcs were unable to detect the potion because Michael had disguised it as blood. The abandoned man's heroic rank was not for show. The guard, unsuspecting, calmly pours out the contents of the vial and is already happy that tonight at midnight, the tribe will not only taste the blood of ordinary animals, but also the blue dragon itself. The time has come for the ceremony to take place. The head of the tribe stands before the cauldron, proudly announces it, and raises his cup. The feast begins. The entire tribe, sitting before the leader, begins to feast. They raise their cups and drink the blood, which should give them strength and bless them for new exploits. Having slipped into the crowd of orcs, Oliver quietly pours out the contents of the cup. Now, all that remains is the small matter. The protagonist is looking out for the leaders of the tribe. On a small ledge, a little further away, sat a small group of orcs. Oliver quickly realized that these were the leaders. Noticing the largest orc in the center, the young man remembers Michael's words. In the center sat the most powerful and wise leader of the tribe, who destroyed all the shamans, a creature with the power of the mountains, Jamal. The festival is almost over. All the orcs have drunk the blood mixed with the elixir of madness, including the leaders. The strength of the effect may vary depending on the power of the orc, but in an hour, everyone will be overcome with madness. Oliver leaves because his task is completed, and if unforeseen circumstances do not prevent this night, the Stonefang tribe will disappear forever. Now the main character sets off in search of the tribe's treasures. Having gone a little further into the forest, Oliver hid in the bushes. Not far from the tribe, there was a small mine, which was constantly guarded by orc guards. This was the treasury. The gods watched Oliver. They couldn't understand how this player knew so much, and even assumed that he was a psychic. At this time, the protagonist assessed the situation and the strength of the guards. They were not comparable to the leaders, but they were still very strong. The time came for the elixir to take effect. The orcs went mad and began to fight among themselves. Oliver was not going to stand aside, so as soon as one of the orcs won, the protagonist called on his shadow, Karun, and cut off the winner's head. Karuna easily cuts off the orc's head, because under the influence of the potion, they are no match for the Moon Knight. Having defeated the guards, Oliver and Karun enter the treasury. Inside, another guard was waiting for them, who had also gone mad. He was guarding the chained gates. The guard immediately noticed that someone was approaching, but due to the effect of the elixir, he could not tell whether it was an enemy or a friend. Everything seemed to be in a fog before his eyes. Mistaking Karin for an ally, the orc asks him to return to the tribe and tell them that something is wrong with his body. But Karun was not an ally of the orc. He was a faithful servant of his master, so he immediately began to attack the enemy. The guard, even in this state, was able to repel the knight's attack. It is difficult to imagine how strong an orc with a clear mind is. The knight continued his attacks without stopping. The orc continued to resist, repelling all of Karun's attacks. But at that moment, the orc was completely overcome by madness. The knight took advantage of the moment and with a lightning-fast lunge cut off the guard's head. Looking at the lifeless body of the orc, the knight felt nothing. He was just a shadow that carried out the orders of his master. Oliver watched the fight and assessed his shadow knight. He admitted that his servant was strong, but he was no match for the strength of a real Moon Knight. Approaching the dead orc, the main character began to search him. He needed the key to the treasury. After some time, Oliver was finally able to find the key, and the notification system also alerted the young man about this. So now the hero can use the key, but the system offered him several options for how events would unfold. Use the key, take it with him, read the spell on the key, make a copy, or hide near the door. The system gave Oliver a lot of options to choose from, and he knew what was behind the door. The treasury contained a gift from the earth dragon Trancred to the tribe. It granted the owner the ability to break stones with their hands and increase the power of spells. But the price of this gift was endless battles for the right to own them. To avoid future conflicts and bloodshed, one of the ancestors gathered all the shamans and bound them with a brotherly curse. Holding the key in his hands, the protagonist understood that although the task was called 5 Friendly Brothers, in fact, they wanted to kill each other, they just couldn't. So Oliver decides to take the key but not touch the gloves. This will be enough to set the leaders of the tribe against each other. As the hero had expected, in all this chaos, the leaders thought only of the stone serpent's gift and immediately rushed to the treasury. Seeing that the guard was killed and the key stolen, they began to break down the gates to check the treasury. But once inside the vault, the orcs were stunned by what they saw. They couldn't believe their eyes. Their precious gift was untouched, the glove still hovering above the sacred altar. The orcs didn't understand what was happening and began to blame each other for the chaos. But Jamal put aside their bickering and senseless accusations and reminded the leaders that they were bound by a brotherly curse. The leaders of the tribe could not calm down. Now they needed to deal with the chaos. The orcs retreated, but they still suspected Jamal of what was happening, thinking that he had set everything up to get the gloves. Jamal didn't say a word to the leaders, he just looked at the bound tribal relic. Meanwhile, the leaders were dealing with the chaos that had flooded their tribe. They had practically no strength left. The exhausted orc was filled with anger, so the effect of the elixir of madness became stronger. But suddenly, turning his gaze into the depths of the cave, the orc notices something. Oliver was hiding in this cave, and since he was recognized, the effect of the disguise ends. He turns back into a human, but he remains with a permanent effect, the language of trolls. The protagonist assumed his true form. He did not expect to be exposed so quickly, but now the fight cannot be avoided. The enraged orc, holding his sharp axe in his hands, immediately begins to attack. Oliver is focused and calm. He calls upon his Shadow Knight Karin and gives the order to kill the enemy. The knight rushes into a fierce fight with the orc, and after dealing countless blows, the orc falls to the ground, bleeding. Karun is preparing to deliver the final decisive blow and is already swinging his sword. The orc understood that he had lost. His last words before dying were that his brothers would definitely avenge his death. The orc holds a grudge against Oliver and casts a lethargy spell on him, which reduces the snowman's strength and agility. The protagonist wins and gains experience points. The young man is surprised by the duration and strength of the orc's curse. In a normal group, it would be divided among all participants, but this is a different case. But Oliver was calm, because the curse would have practically no effect on him, because he was summoning shadows. The test was completed, so as not to leave any traces, Oliver set fire to the battlefield and left. Madness still raged through the tribe. The orcs were killing each other without stopping, and the leaders' barracks were on fire. The three leaders suffered the same fate as the tribe. They went mad and headed towards the only one who, at first glance, had not yet lost his mind. Their target was Jamal. They considered him guilty of the chaos and thirsted for revenge. But the strongest did not utter a word. He only turned around and looked at his brothers with an angry look. Oliver went to a hut that was located near the orc camp. The gods who were watching the young man did not appreciate his passing of the test. Arriving at the hut, the main character armed himself with a frying pan and began to cook dinner. The young man decided to add the moon seed he received for successfully completing the first test to his dish. He didn't know what effect the seed would have, but he decided to take the risk. After all, he remembered that the seed's effect is divided into two types, permanent and temporary. In this situation, Oliver wanted to get a temporary effect or skill because it would be much more useful for the final battle. The dish is ready. Holding the plate in his hands, the protagonist is pleased with his culinary abilities. His cooking skill has increased. Oliver tried his dish. The taste was weak, but in such chaos, even finding a hut was a great success. The protagonist ate a hearty meal and received a temporary skill from the moon seed, the phase of the moon. Everything went according to plan. At this time, Jamal was talking with his brothers. He was accused of the death of the younger one, but the strongest orc was not involved. After this news, Jamal understood everything. An enemy had infiltrated the tribe and somehow added some kind of elixir to the sacred cauldron, after which everyone went crazy. Jamal clearly understood that his brothers were fools. They could not have come up with such a plan. Of all the tribe, only the strongest and smartest could do this, so the brothers blamed Jamal. The brothers couldn't calm down. Madness was driving them crazy. They were ready to attack their brother in a crowd, because according to them, he had planned everything to get the relic. Jamal did not try to convince his brothers otherwise. He confirmed their words and showed them the stone gloves. The orcs were enraged by such arrogance of their fellow tribesmen. They began to attack him altogether, not giving him a chance to retreat. But the strongest one did not even think of retreating. He repelled the attacks of his kinsmen with one blow. The orcs were not prepared for such force. Boulders flew straight at them. One of the brothers suffered the most. He took on a barrage of stones and died, leaving Jamal with a curse, a lung disease. The surviving leaders were stunned by such strength and the sudden death of their comrade. But Jamal wasn't going to stop there. He was going to kill all his competitors. After striking another one, Jamal kills him and receives a second curse. Now the orc's accuracy, defense, and resistance are reduced by 70%. After killing his last brother, Jamal receives another curse. His stamina will constantly decrease and will not recover. Left as the only leader, Jamal didn't care about the curses. He wanted to quickly unite the remnants of the tribe and fix the situation, when suddenly he noticed an unknown silhouette in the distance. It was Oliver's Shadow Knight, Karun, who was already heading straight towards the orc to fight him. The Moon Knight approached the orc with lightning speed, and as he approached, he was already preparing to cut off the enemy's head. But the orc manages to dodge the deadly blow. The blow was so strong that all the stone blocks around were destroyed. Jamal, who thought he was invincible, felt for the first time in his life what it was like to feel afraid and be cornered. Oliver watched everything that was happening and was already smiling, because he could smell the victory. Everything was going according to plan. The orc realized that the guy standing behind the knight was the one who had set everything up. Jamal was filled with anger and thirsted for revenge. Everything fell into place. The orc understood that the brothers would not have been smart enough to come up with and implement such a complex plan. But there were still doubts about him, but not now. The enraged orc was determined to take revenge on the young man for all his actions, so he immediately rose from the ground and rushed into battle. Karun defended his master, and as soon as the orc began to attack, he took up the fight. The fight lasted for quite a long time. The orc was undoubtedly already exhausted, but he was not going to give up. Oliver believed in his shadow. Karun had to win. Suddenly, Jamal raises his hands up, and the system alerts Oliver that the orc is about to create an earthquake. The protagonist didn't understand what was happening. Stone fists were an item that gave enormous power, but they also had an enormous recoil on the user. According to Oliver's calculations, Jamal should have already been exhausted by his own strength. Could it be that the young man was mistaken in his calculations? It felt as if the gloves had not weakened the opponent, but rather strengthened him. Oliver thought for a long time about what went wrong, and finally figured out that the stone fists had transformed into mountain fists. The manual was minimal in its information and said that stone fists could transform into mountain fists if they were filled with earth energy. The young man began to get nervous, because for all these 17 years, the strategy of attacking the brothers had not changed. He was worried that the result had changed. Replaying it all over again in his head, Oliver realized that he had never fought Jamal in all these 17 years. In the game, the strongest was chosen randomly every time. This was the first time that Jamal was the strongest orc. Suddenly, the orc strikes the knight and throws him towards Oliver, thereby striking the spellcaster as well. The main character is badly hit. He falls to the ground and loses consciousness. At this moment, Oliver sees his past before the legend of the snowman was written. Back then, he was the leader of a group that lost the challenge. The other participants wanted to throw their pieces and start a new game, but not Oliver. The participants of the game considered the snowman reckless, because the chances of winning the test were slim. But the snowman did not give up. He always chose to face problems head on. The chances were low, but the dice had already been cast. It was all up to luck. Everything was in her hands. Oliver woke up. The memories gave him faith in himself and his figures. So the hero rose from his knees and continued the battle. Standing directly in front of Karun, the orc gathered his strength to crush his opponent. But the snowman was not ready to lose either. Having gathered all his strength, Oliver uses the skill, the phase of the moon, the full moon. The curtain rises on the moon stage. The main character, the Moon Knight Karuna, all stats are raised by 50% under the moonlight. All stats of other creatures are lowered by 20%. The full moon has risen. Now the stat points are enough to use the completed moonlight /skill and defeat the enemy. The moonlight illuminated the entire space, and the shockwave was so strong that it destroyed everything in its path. The orc was still breathing, but he could no longer fight. On his knees, he did not want to admit defeat. But Karun didn't give any chance for salvation. He dealt the final decisive blow to the orc and sent him into eternal sleep. Snowman defeats Jamal and receives a curse, a skin disease, a decrease in all characteristics by 30% for 1 week. The system also notifies that all leaders are defeated, so the snowman is freed from all curses, and the reward is upgraded to the sacred relic of the Stone Fang. The gods looked down from the heavens at the snowman and were stunned by his passing. It was so interesting to watch the test that many of them became fans of the snowman. Looking at Jamal's lifeless body, Oliver decides to summon his shadow, because this character is an unpredictable variable that destroys the initial settings of the world and exceeds expectations. The protagonist uses his skill on Jamal's body and summons his shadow, which will now have to serve the snowman. The shadow rises, and signs of its master, Jamal gains skills, stone armor, and earthquake stance. Jamal's shadow reaches out to Oliver and asks him to let him collect the brothers' bodies. Having collected the bodies, Jamal uses the skill, magic absorption, and takes the powers of his relatives, thereby becoming stronger. The snowman brought the revolution and achieved much. He freed the city of Kongoriot from the yoke of the Stone Fang. Even the merchants praise the snowman. His name will be remembered for a long time. The structure of the world has changed. The player can now choose one of two proposed challenges. Several secret adventures have been unlocked due to increased reputation, but first they must be discovered. Finally, Oliver reached the reward chest, in which he found experience points, attribute points, mountain fists, stone mantle, and spirit roots. Oliver was extremely surprised by such luck. He got a rare item, mountain fists, a sacred relic of the tribe. Having summoned the stone gloves from his inventory, Oliver decided to give them to Jamal. They would give him more power than anyone else. As for himself, the main character got a stone robe, which gave additional stat points, and it looked not bad at all. Oliver also received a spirit root that had an unknown effect, but he would prepare it later. The young man was pleased with his reward, and the gods who watched over him considered him lucky. Having moved from one place to another, Oliver found himself in a square where a crowd of people had gathered. People were in a panic. They didn't understand where their world had gone and why they were being forced to undergo tests. The protagonist also didn't understand what was happening. A system window appeared in front of him, notifying him of the second adventure and the player rating. So, the scoring was over. Oliver scored 320,000 and became the leader of the adventurers. The player in second place scored 150,000 points. People around were amazed by such a gap in points. One of those around started shouting at the top of the street and looking for the first person on the list. This person was sure that the leader knew exactly where they all ended up. Oliver walked and looked around. He observed the behavior of people and assessed the situation. From observations, the main character came to the conclusion that all these people are residents of the same country. However, Corden spoke about the unification of worlds. This clearly goes beyond national boundaries. In other words, there should be representatives of other countries here as well. Before the hero's eyes, the system window appeared again, notifying him of the start of a rest period in the safe zone, in the city of Kongori. People were surprised by the system's mercifulness, and they were also very curious about whose names were hidden in the adventurer rank sheets. As Oliver approached the castle gates, he noticed that people did not know how to use the adventurer's card. Therefore, approaching the guard in front of everyone, he demonstrated what the ID was for and how to use it. Having checked the identity of the young man, the guard ordered the gates to be opened and allowed the young man to enter the city. People saw that the gates to the city were open and immediately rushed towards them, wanting to get into the city, forgetting all topics of conversation. Oliver understood that there were many people wanting to stay in the city, and hotel rooms were limited, so he needed to book a room as soon as possible. Having reached the tavern, Oliver immediately began asking the owner about available rooms. Only expensive ones remained, but the young man had no choice, so he paid 10 gold coins for a room for a month and 2 gold coins for additional services. Having climbed up to the second floor, the main character finds himself in his room. He immediately lies down on the bed and calls on the Shadow Knight to guard him. Oliver fell asleep instantly and again dreamed of the world of eternity, which now brought him only pain and suffering. But instantly everything changed. It became dark around. The main character could not see anything, but he was reassured by the fact that this place did not look like heaven. Even in all this, the system did not leave the young man alone. It notified him that the madness merchant Janet had shown interest in the madness he had collected. Oliver had never met a madness dealer before, so he didn't know what to expect from this meeting. An unknown creature appeared before the young man in the guise of a beautiful girl, wearing a demon mask. She found him by the pleasant aroma emanating from his body. Oliver did not understand who was standing in front of him, a friend or an enemy. He was worried that something could threaten his life. The girl decided not to torment the guy and almost immediately introduced herself. She is a merchant and acts as an intermediary in this fusion of worlds, Janet. Janet told Oliver that the inhabitants of his world were sold to the inhabitants of other worlds, who had been watching them all this time and dying laughing. In other words, they were sold like gladiators or slaves in the arena. The audience pays with madness for a good spectacle. Madness, the force opposite to faith, they set all worlds in motion. And Janet is a merchant who exchanges the madness collected by the residents for items. Listening to Janet's story, Oliver realizes that Corden's words now make sense and the picture takes shape in his head. The gods gain madness by selling humanity and the inhabitants of Pandia, and also show the spectacle to the inhabitants of other worlds in order to gain madness from them. Now, the main character understands the system, and to escape from this hell, there is only one way out: Ascension. Oliver has collected enough madness and can acquire many different unique items. Luck is on his side again. The young man inquired about what was available to him, and then the saleswoman opened a catalog of available items for him. Oliver was surprised at how much he could buy. Of everything presented, the hero was only interested in a bag and a vessel for spices of unusual rank. Oliver was not interested in anything else. Janet couldn't believe it. Her pride and honor were hurt because she considered herself the best trader with the finest selection. Having experienced such humiliation, the merchant decided to show off a unique specimen. A shadow flower, rank, rare, special feature, allows one-time summoning of a shadow on a target, which is much stronger than the summoner. Oliver is immediately interested in this flower. He asks about the price and finds out that it costs about 3,000 madness. And this is practically the hero's entire fortune. The young man couldn't decide because he didn't know the course of madness, so he didn't understand whether it was expensive or cheap. But the shadow flower interested him very much. It was a tempting offer. Then, to help the young man make a decision, the merchant decided to haggle a little and offered the items he had chosen as a bonus along with the flower. In exchange, Oliver had to promise Janet that the next deal would be with her. The protagonist was not against doing business with Janet in the future, especially since the offer was really tempting. So, without thinking twice, he agreed to the terms. Janet was delighted with such a profitable deal and a new regular customer. Saying goodbye to Oliver, she wished him good luck and left the young man. The morning came, the sun was shining straight into Oliver's eyes. He did not look like a man who had managed to have a good rest. But in this dream, he acquired many new good things. Getting out of bed and looking around the room, he notices that the items he acquired in his dream are lying on the table. The gods never stopped watching the hero's actions for a second. They were interested in everything that happened to him. Even though the young man was in the rest area, he still had a lot of things to do. First, distribute his attribute points. Second, check the next adventure. Third, check the mood of the other players. Fourth, complete the task related to the pocket watch. Taking the watch in his hand, Oliver didn't know where to start because he didn't remember any information about it. After waking up, his memories of the eternal world periodically disappear. He tried to concentrate and remember the essence of some tasks, but all in vain. He was frightened by the disappearance of memories because he is not one of those who has a leaky memory, which means that something is happening to him. People crowded into the square. They were all worried about what was happening. They were overcome with panic. Oliver was also in the city square, assessing the situation and the condition of the people. He did not expect that everything would be so bad, but he did not lose his mind and remained calm. Suddenly, a confident male voice began to be heard from the stage of the city square, which made everyone pay attention to the owner of this voice. The man called on people to unite, because it was better to increase their chances of survival by joining together in groups than to die alone. The young man was outraged and irritated by the man's public speech. He did not want to listen to him or give in to his speech. But for people who were in a panic, he became like a ray of hope, a savior who would help them cope with difficulties. To convince people and have more influence on them, a muscular man who looked like a professional in his field was invited on stage. The speaker also claimed that the man in armor was the hidden leader in the adventurer ranking list. Oliver was frightened by what was happening because people would actually trust this deceiver and follow him to death. But the speaker did not stop. Continuing to convince people, he increasingly convinced them that only with the help of force could they survive. People, although with doubts, believed the man. They wanted to survive and live a long and happy life, so they were ready to fight for it. It was on the hope of ordinary people that the speaker intended to create a community in which people would protect each other. Oliver assumed that this could happen. Perhaps others were already creating similar communities. At first, they would really protect each other, but after that, their sense of self-importance would grow and wars would begin. The young man didn't care about such groups. He didn't trust anyone and basically didn't care about people. From childhood, the boy was familiar with indifference and mistrust, thanks to life in the orphanage. Having gone on about his business, the protagonist arrives at the training center, and at the entrance, he is met by the guardian of this place, the Seer of Darkness. At this point, a system appears with options for the development of events. Learn new skills, improve existing skills, test your strength, ask for a job, or learn about the shadow summoners. Oliver already knew which option to choose, so he immediately voiced that he wanted to learn new skills, and then the keeper invited him to his place. Walking further, in complete darkness, the young man saw the skill tree. He was struck by its beauty. because at that moment, the guy could only imagine what it looked like. The young man quickly adapted because he was already familiar with the system. First, the young shadow summoner wanted to improve his most important skill, shadow summoning. Oliver invested his remaining stat points into his shadows, increasing their stats by 5% and also increasing his shadow dimension by 10%. The protagonist finished distributing his stat points and returned to the tavern, sitting with a mug of ale, looking at his pocket watch and pondering the task. Oliver understands that if anyone finds out about his source of power and knowledge, the young man will be immediately destroyed, so he decides to move alone. While thinking about this, Oliver suddenly notices an old man who is staring intently. He seems familiar to the main character. The old man became interested in the pocket watch that the young man had been holding in his hands all this time. He approached the young man and began asking the guy about it. It seems Oliver has found someone who knows something about this watch, because the old man himself approached him and asked to take a closer look at it. The young man wanted to ask the old man about the watch, so they decided to continue the dialogue in the old watchmaker's workshop. There were many different clocks in the workshop. It was clear that the old man loved his occupation and treated his work with care. Turning to the young man, the old man introduced himself. His name was Bill Marcus. The watchmaker wanted to know how the young man found his watch. And then Oliver told him the story of how he found them. The old man seemed familiar to the young man, but he couldn't remember him, and all attempts ended in a headache. It was clear that the main character had already completed a hidden mission, but there was no information about it in his head. After telling the stories, Bill realized what happened to the watch and how it was lost, and he asked permission to take a closer look at the watch. Then Bill was convinced that it was definitely his work. His name was engraved on them, which Oliver could not read for so long. The old man began to tell the story of this watch. It was about his granddaughter, 20 years ago. She was captured by the orcs of the Rocky Mountains. Bill asked everyone for help, but everyone refused because it was a hopeless case. But then one man appeared who said that he would save his granddaughter. Oliver asked who dared to go on such a dangerous mission, and the old man told him that the name of the savior was also engraved on the watch. The young man didn't understand anything because he didn't see another name on the clock. Then the old man told him that the name of the second owner of the watch was hidden. When Oliver saw the inscription, he couldn't believe what was happening. His nickname, Snowman, was written on the watch. Bill was also surprised that 20 years later, this watch would be brought to him by a man with the same name and the same age. Suddenly, the young man felt ill. Memories filled his head. Now he remembered and understood what was happening. Oliver's first figure was also a snowman. It was a magician who carried out this task. Could it be that the figures that the main character raised had an impact on the world of eternity? Having understood everything, Oliver went to the city library to learn the history of the world. From what he read, he understood that in this world, his figures had made it. A person can accomplish a lot in a lifetime, but in these 20 years, 30 figures, without Oliver's knowledge, created the history of Pandia. Bill's adventures weren't over yet. The old man showed him the place where his granddaughter was buried, and although her body wasn't there, he believed that there had to be such a place of memory of his precious granddaughter. Now the watch could be returned to its owner. Oliver placed his hand on the monument and apologized for coming too late. A fumble, a term meaning the ultimate failure, is also the name for a roll of the dice that results in a 1. And the boy's first figure, the snowman, was killed by just that. The protagonist suggested that perhaps his memory lapses were related to the psychological trauma he received during the game. Suddenly, the young man felt very ill. The task was completed, and as a reward, he received characteristic points. But the pain overwhelmed everything that was happening around him. Oliver could not concentrate. His memories began to return. The memory of the 30 figures was still there. It had disintegrated along with them. A system window appeared before the main character, informing him of a new adventure, fate, and things that needed to be returned. Oliver inherited the unfulfilled wishes of his first figure, the snowman. Bill began to worry about the young man, seeing how the boy was suffering from pain. He was worried about him and wanted to help. But the main character assured the poor old man that everything was fine and there was no need to worry. The old man didn't really understand what was happening to the guy, but he was always happy to help him. Bill's favor was growing. Bill finished all his business near the grave and invited Oliver to return. The protagonist understood that the task was completed and it was possible to return, so he agreed with him. But the young man was worried about one fact, that he could inherit the will of his pieces. Standing in front of the grave, the boy remembered his first figure. She was great, with enormous potential, and now she helped him find his destiny. Now the goal of the main character was to collect the destinies of his figures, which would return to him the lost memories of the world of eternity. And only thanks to his memories and experience will he be able to reach ascension and save the world. A month has passed, the vacation is over, now all adventure seekers will set off on new missions. People no longer believed that the government would save them, but there were still those who still hoped for them. Oliver went to the Adventurers Association to choose a new task for himself. Standing near the task board, he carefully chose, while people continued to whisper behind his back and discuss the latest news in the world. All the tasks presented on the board were not interesting to the young man. Then he noticed that a suspicious man was sitting in the hall. Oliver knew that he was related to the hidden task, so he went straight to him. Coming closer, a system window appeared in front of the main character again, with a choice of options for the development of events. Oliver chose the fourth option and asked the man what he was doing there, since he didn't look like an ordinary person. The man became interested in the young man, so he decided to tell him that he was looking for people for an interesting job. Sitting down at the table, the young man began to listen attentively to the storyteller, and from what he heard, he understood that the essence of the work was the transportation of goods. The man wanted to entrust this work to someone reliable who could handle this task, and also promised to generously reward the performer. Oliver knew that he was dealing with a fraud, but this didn't frighten him. He almost immediately agreed to the job and accepted the assignment. The man opposite had once found someone who would agree to take his job, so he introduced himself to the young man as Arden. The two guys watched Oliver's actions. They seemed suspicious to him, and they also paid attention to his equipment. The guys standing near the wall were plotting something. One of them went to the guild to bring a couple more people, and the other stayed to watch. The next day, all the seekers were already preparing for adventures. They did not want to leave the safe zone, but the system forced them to undergo tests. Oliver looked around and assessed the condition of the people. He believed that the system was cruel because a month of rest had ruined the whole mood. But there was no time to think about it. The time for the third test had come. The main character was surrounded by a bright light. The movement had begun. The hero's third test involved cargo transportation. The difficulty of this task lay in the fact that the young man would encounter bandits along the way who wanted to get their hands on the goods. Having learned the essence of the task, the protagonist remembered that his first character, the snowman, had already completed it, but this was no reason to relax. The young man moved to the right place. Arden meets him and introduces him to a group of people who will be Oliver's partners. The new team members decided to introduce themselves right away. The guy in the cap was called Ethan, and the second one was Robert. Oliver recognized them immediately. They were the ones who had been following him in the Adventure Association. But that was not the main thing now. There must be traces of a second figure in this adventure. Arden informs the boys that even though this is an escort mission, they will be in reserve because they already have enough security. The boys weren't too concerned about the mission. They had a different plan, so they immediately headed towards the cart. But Oliver knew that this task was not as simple as it might seem at first glance, because the adventure chain could dramatically change the difficulty. A seemingly ordinary mission will, by the end, become one that is practically impossible to complete, and it will not be easier for the hero, but he still needs to go on to find traces of the second figure. So, the test began, the cart set off, the young men were already sitting in one of them, but still did not suspect anything. Oliver didn't trust his partners. He was sure that they were up to something, but he didn't know what yet. But the hero was sure that they had definitely come for him. He wondered who these guys could be, whether they were assassins hunting for other players' equipment, or if they simply wanted to prevent the mission from being successfully completed. The guys were talking. They considered this mission to be the easiest and did not even compare it with their previous tests. Suddenly, Robert turned to the snowman and asked what his profession was. Oliver wasn't in the mood to talk to his partners, so he only answered briefly, "Summoner." The group members laughed because they didn't believe that anyone could choose such a profession. According to the guy's logic, a man should participate in the battle as a knight, and not stand on the sidelines as a summoner. Oliver didn't care what his partners said. He was only concerned about the task now. But the gods were outraged by the guy's words. They were true fans of the summoner, so they wanted to put these upstarts in their place, who did not yet understand the full power of the shadows. One of the partners started asking the main character about the guild. He was interested in which guild the snowman had joined. The snowman had not yet joined any guild. Upon hearing this, Robert began to advise him to quickly join some community. Oliver had no intention of joining a guild. He didn't think it was necessary, because with or without a guild, his own partners could betray him. It was easier to be alone. The protagonist knew how events would unfold. He was sure that problems would inevitably overtake them, and the difficulty of the adventure would increase. Evening came, the cart stopped for the night, and the boys lit a fire and sat around it to warm themselves. Arden asked if the boys had enjoyed their dinner and brought some alcohol. The guys immediately pounced on the alcohol to drink it. Now the evening promised to be much more interesting. The partners continued drinking, but not the snowman. He only looked at the liquid and scanned it with his perception skill. Oliver was confused by the strange smell of the alcohol. He suspected something was wrong, but decided to pretend to bring the bowl to his face. Raising the vessel to his mouth, Oliver did not drink the liquid, but using his skill, Shadow Hand, he quietly poured out the alcohol. Suddenly, Arden informs everyone present that the plan is slightly different from the original. So as not to upset the guys, Arden promises them compensation of 600 zlotys each. The guys weren't upset by this news. Under the influence of alcohol, they weren't indignant. On the contrary, everything was a joy for them, and the news of the increase in remuneration only made them happy. But at that moment, bandits attacked the camp. Arrows flew at the guys who were sitting quietly near the fire. Oliver managed to notice the sudden attack and immediately warned the boys about the danger. One of the group members didn't have time to react. An arrow pierced his neck. The boys arrived in panic. They were not prepared for such a sudden attack. They abandoned everything and headed towards the carts to take cover behind them. Oliver took cover behind the cart and continued to observe the situation. The other guys also took cover behind the carts. They didn't understand what was happening and didn't believe that their partner was seriously wounded. The group members tried to find out from Arden what was going on, but the man could not answer them. Arden was annoyed. He didn't like that a bunch of guys were asking him questions like that. Holding a knife to Robert's throat, the man said that there was a canyon nearby where they could drop the tail and then return to the forest. Robert didn't believe they could handle such a task, but he couldn't refuse Arden because he was threatening his life. Arden continued to threaten Robert's life, forcing him to act according to the above plan. Robert had no choice. He understood that he would have to act according to Arden's plan. So he made the decision to get into the carts and head towards the canyon. The bandits set off in pursuit. They were going to catch up with the carts and take all the goods. The guys drove with all their might and wanted to break away from the bandits, but it was difficult. A wounded partner was lying in one of the carts. The surviving participants tried to save him, but the guy was already losing consciousness. Oliver had no intention of simply running away, so he climbed onto the cart and prepared to attack his opponents. The guys were in a panic. They didn't understand what was happening. They wanted to run away. Robert, in a hurry, turns to Oliver and offers him to team up until they get out of this mess. But Oliver didn't need that. He could handle the bandits on his own. The guys were outraged by this answer. They had a desire to teach the upstart a lesson, so they took out their weapons. Suddenly, the boys felt ill. They fell onto the floor of the cart and could not move. Oliver had been watching what was happening all this time. His partners were blaming him. They thought that he had done something to them. But the protagonist clarified the situation for the group members. They are now in this state because they drank the alcohol that Arden gave them. The bandits were already catching up. They were moving very quickly and were already close. The distance between the bandits and the carts was rapidly decreasing. They had very little left. Seeing this, Oliver summons his shadow, Jamal, and goes on the attack to protect the group. The paralyzed boys lay on the floor of the cart and watched what was happening from the side. They were amazed by the summoned creature and did not believe the words. Robert knew who Oliver had summoned. Jamal, the most powerful orc leader, stood before him. The bandits were so close that it was not difficult to see their faces. The situation was difficult, but it was still too early to attack the opponents. Oliver was waiting for the perfect moment. Oliver and his shadow jump off the cart. The remaining partners were worried. They did not want to be alone. The main character didn't care about his partner's words. He didn't care about them. The carts moved forward at full speed, but a bandit trap stood in their way. Arden noticed the trap but didn't stop, so he told everyone to hold on tight. Having fallen into the enemy's trap, the carts were overturned. Now they had nowhere to go. They could not leave the goods and give them to the bandits. Arden was able to survive after such a crash. He gets up from the ground and takes out a weapon. Holding the sword with one hand, the man calls on all survivors to stand up and protect the goods. The bandits were already preparing for an attack. Now it's a war in which everyone is for himself. One of the bandits recognizes Arden and calls him by a different name. It seems the merchant was not who he claimed to be. The men continued to talk, preparing for battle, provoking each other with harsh expressions. Arden was a former member of a gang and offered his opponent to join him on better terms. But the bandit only laughed at Arden's words. He was interested in the map and its decipherment. Arden had these two things and he wasn't going to just give them to the bandit. There was an obvious conflict between the men, so they almost immediately began a fierce fight. Other bandits also joined the fray, and a fierce battle began, in which all the wagon guards took part. Oliver did not join the battle, he only watched, as he did not want to waste energy in vain. Jamal didn't care much about the fate of other people. He was loyal to his master. Oliver sat near the tree and remembered how he had completed this task in the past. He already knew what was really hidden behind the adventure. A famous ruin plunderer who settled in Novira Borgo. Cujo, this is Arden, the eternally dissatisfied subordinate. While exploring the ruins, found a map, which he took for himself and tried to decipher. Borgo found out about this and was going to catch him, but Cujo managed to escape to Kongori, so they had to settle in the Great Forest and wait. Judging by Cujo's actions, he was planning to make 5 blood sacrifices to open the ruins. That's why the liquor was poisoned, so that the hired adventurers would not resist. A fierce battle continues between Arden and the bandit, at the end of which Arden still manages to win. Sitting on the corpse, Arden continues to pierce his opponent's body with his sword to make sure he is dead. Oliver approaches the distraught Arden. The boy understood that the man in front of him was not long for this world. But he didn't want to die and hope to be saved, so he prayed to the snowman for help. Oliver had no intention of helping Arden. He just looked at him coldly. Kneeling down, getting close to the man's face, Oliver watched as Arden screamed in despair. Driven mad by the realization of his imminent death, Arden offered the protagonist to listen to an interesting story. But Oliver didn't need this. He already knew everything, so he didn't listen to Arden. The protagonist took only the map. The man warned the young man about the imminent appearance of a monster that had long ceased to resemble a human. Now Oliver was only interested in the map he had obtained. The map itself was familiar to him, but the decipherment was different from the previous one. Arden laughed. He understood that the young man was also attracted by the ruins, but his opponent, Borgo, already knew the way to them. Oliver looked down at his former partner, not caring about the man's words. The young man was confident in himself and his abilities. Arden laughed. He was sure that the guy would give in to his desires. But Oliver, standing right in front of Arden, proudly replied that he controlled his desires. Robert and his partner were still alive. They tried to choose, but their bodies were still paralyzed. The sound of hooves could be heard, indicating that a large group was approaching. The boys understood that they would not survive in such a situation. They were overcome with a feeling of fear because they did not want to die yet. The leader of the bandits, Borgo, arrived, sitting majestically on his horse and commanding a group of people. The bandits were looking for Arden. They needed the stolen map, but they were too late. Arden's body was already cold by the time it was found. Borgo was mad. He walked up to the lifeless body, grabbed its head, and lifted it straight in front of him. Holding his body in front of him like that, the captain just laughed madly. It frightened his subordinates, but they couldn't say a word. Having searched the thief's body, the captain did not find what he wanted and was disappointed by this. One of the subordinates suggested that perhaps something had happened. Borgo wanted to know who had his card, so as soon as his subordinates found the survivors, he began interrogating them. The prisoners knew nothing. They had not heard anything about the map. Only fear and horror were visible in their eyes. Borgo was not merciful. On the contrary, he was known for his cruelty. So, realizing that the guy knew nothing, he immediately cut off his head. The second guy was much smarter than the first, so he immediately started telling Borgo about the snowman. One of his subordinates had already sent a couple of his brothers in pursuit. But not far from the scene of the incident, he found their bodies. Having learned about this, Borgo became even more interested in the snowman and began asking the boy about him. But the young man only knew that the snowman was a shadow summoner. The chief received all the information. Now he had no need for the guy, so with a sharp swing, he chopped off the young man's head. Mounting his horse, Borgo and his subordinates set off in pursuit of the snowman. Oliver arrived at the scene and was already standing in front of the entrance to the ruins, which were marked on the map. He couldn't go any further on horseback, so he dismounted and walked forward. Along the way, he begins to remember every step he took in the past. Suddenly, among a pile of leaves, the young man finds a bronze statue that needs to be turned clockwise. Having done everything according to the instructions, Oliver activates the mechanism that opens the gate. Oliver looks at the mechanism and realizes that now he needs to approach the entrance of the ruins. Suddenly, the young man's senses became heightened. The system warned him of approaching danger. With his attack, Borgo showed that he had caught up with the young man. Jamal barely managed to stop the enemy's swift attack, thereby saving his master. Holding the enemy's arrow in his hands, Jamal advises his master to move forward, because the enemies are very close. Oliver is determined to continue the test, so he sets off ahead. The gods watched Oliver, his loyal fans, sincerely worried and wished him luck in the test. The protagonist approached the gate, but 5 bloody sacrifices were required to open it. Suddenly, the young man began to tear up the map he had obtained with such difficulty. The gods did not understand his actions. Oliver understood the translation differently. In his interpretation, 5 bloody sacrifices meant sacrificing 5 drops of blood. The protagonist turned out to be right, and the type of ruins opened up before him. Now the young man could continue the test and entered the ruins. The gods were delighted with Oliver. Many of them sacrificed madness to him. Borgo is already standing in front of the gates of the ruins, but he was too late. The snowman was already inside. Borgo ordered one of his subordinates to decipher the trap, but the bandit was not sure that he could handle this task. Coming closer, the bandit realized that the snowman knew that Arden's decryption was incorrect. He immediately reported this to Borgo. This snowman became even more interesting to Borgo. Now he wanted to catch up with the guy and meet him face to face. A system window appeared in front of Oliver, alerting him that a group of Borgo ruin plunderers had entered the containment chamber. Oliver wasn't too worried about it, although he didn't expect Borgo to catch up with him so quickly. The group of ruin plunderers confidently followed the snowman's tracks. Borgo was in anticipation. Oliver encountered the first trap on his way. He stood in front of it and was already thinking about how to get past it. On both sides of the room there are arrow traps, and in front there is a tablet with inscriptions in an unknown ancient language. The system window appeared before his eyes again, offering many options, but Oliver chose to decipher the inscription. The sign said, "Practice humility and moderation, show respect and endless gratitude to Ismokhan." Last time, Oliver chose the same thing, so he crouched down and threw a stone to test his theory. Having tested his theory, the protagonist was convinced that he was right and continued on his way. Borgo and his subordinates had also already approached the trap, but Oliver was no longer there. The bandits were surprised that they had not yet caught up with the snowman. The men didn't believe it, so they became dissatisfied and started shouting at each other. Borgo looked at his subordinates with a stern look and reassured his subordinates. In this room, one had to move on one's knees, so the bandit group crouched down and continued on their way. Borgo hated those who were ahead of him. His desire to catch up with the guy grew. One of the subordinates knew everything about the ruins. Moving along the path, he remembered that in the ruins there is a control room for this trap, and if the snowman reached this room, activate the mechanism. Suddenly, the trap was activated and a rain of arrows hit the bandit. The bandits raised their shields and began to defend themselves, and they continued on their way at a fast pace. The group lost many, but had no intention of stopping. Borgo was unhappy with the loss of control. He would definitely get to the snowman and take revenge on him for the death of his boys. Among the dead was a man who knew everything about these ruins. Now the path will become more difficult for the group of bandits. Borgo went crazy from this news. His laughter echoed throughout the area. The snowman became more and more interesting. The protagonist didn't care about his pursuers. He was already close to the next puzzle. The levers were connected to the mechanism of the gate that the hero passed through, with the help of which he was able to delay his opponents. Oliver came to the next gate. He remembered how to get through this room and how to avoid the traps. Looking around the room, the young man noticed that there were no doors. The system window appeared in front of him again, offering several options for action. The young man knew the translation of the trap, so he decided to continue on his way. Oliver closed his eyes and headed straight for the gate, because the translation sounded like, "Close your eyes and walk the path from your heart to Ismokhan." Closing your eyes and walking straight into the traps is madness, but it is the only way to pass the gate. The translation also stated that there were 8 people who called themselves priests, and this number symbolized the local god, Ismokhan. 8 is the number of steps taken by people who were 2 meters tall, so Oliver needs to open his eyes on the 9th step. The light illuminated the room. The hidden door opened before Oliver. He was confident in his abilities and continued on his way. Oliver quickly passed through all the subsequent gates, and the gods watching his passage could not take their eyes off him. The main character was already walking along the dark corridor and approaching the last gate. Oliver followed in the footsteps of his figure. He had to find her fragment of fate and return her memories. The ruin plunderer Gilius is Oliver's second figure who lived a short life. Continuing on his way, Oliver finds himself near the 10th gate, which is called the Hall of Light. At this time, Borgo continued to follow the snowman, and along the way he lost many followers. He sacrificed them in order to move on. The bandits did not want to die so easily, but they could not resist the captain's will. Borgo used their lives as a resource to help him catch the snowman. Oliver looked around, searching for Gilius's body to retrieve the fragment of his destiny. In the corner of the room, Oliver notices a skeleton dressed in clothes he recognizes. It was Gilius. The protagonist approached the skeleton and looked at it with regret. He was sorry that he could not prolong the life of his figure back then. Oliver again felt pain. His head was spinning. At that moment, the transfer of memories from Gilius to the main character began. The young man's head was filled with fragments of the figure's life. He experienced them along with him and felt all the feelings and emotions of the character. Tears streamed down Oliver's face. Gilius's will was transferred to the young man, as well as his skill as a ruin plunderer. Oliver was determined to test Gilius's theory and headed straight for the gate. The protagonist directed the light from the mirrors upward, directly onto the portrait of the goddess. Standing right in front of the Hall of Light, the main character said, "Ismokhan, who gives light to all living things, show me the way." Suddenly, a path opened up before the young man, a staircase leading straight to the sky. Oliver climbed the stairs that led to the top of the ruins. The gods watched over the hero and sacrificed madness to him, which the young man could later use to acquire unique items. As Oliver climbed the stairs, he saw another gate that was closed. Having opened the gate, a long corridor appeared before the young man, at the end of which stood a statue of the goddess. Suddenly, the statue began to speak, greeting the stranger. Oliver looked straight at the statue. He thanked the statue of the goddess for such a warm welcome. The goddess wanted to reward the hero for successfully passing through the ruins. Gold and rare items began to pour out of the wall. Oliver could only choose one item from the entire reward offered. The young man faced a difficult choice because he did not know what might be useful to him in the future. The protagonist uses the skill, perception, and looks closely at all the objects presented. After looking at the objects for a long time, Oliver chooses the Bandage of Insight. In Pandia, there were clans, unions, and tribes with special eyes, and each had different abilities that allowed them to see something specific. Oliver believed that this bandage would allow him to get such eyes, and the penetrating gaze would definitely suit him. The goddess asked the hero if he would like to choose something else, but the young man refused. Ismokhan always gives riches to humble people, so Oliver receives an additional reward. Oliver was delighted with the extra reward, because even without looking, you could tell that there was something rare there. To begin with, the young man wanted to activate his insight, so he immediately put on the bandage. The ability was activated, and the young man's pupils began to glow with a golden light. When activating the ability, Oliver experienced indescribable pain. He did not expect that activation would be accompanied by such torment. Insight is activated. Now the hero sees the world with new eyes. At this moment, Borgo and his followers caught up with Oliver. They were already in the goddess's hall. The young man knew that sooner or later his pursuers would get him, so he was ready for the meeting. Borgo had a certain interest in his opponent, so he began asking the young man questions. But suddenly he was overcome by madness. Borgo was no longer going to talk to the enemy, he wanted to tear him to pieces. Oliver was not frightened by the sinister image of Borgo. He was confident in his abilities, so he watched calmly. Suddenly, the last surviving supporter of Borgo noticed the gold lying nearby. The captain did not like this behavior of his follower, so he swung his axe and killed the last bandit. Borgo's follower did not understand why the leader treated him this way, and after saying his last words, he dies. Borgo did not want to share the reward because he believed that everything in this world belonged to him. Oliver watched the proceedings, wondering how someone like Borgo could reach the very top. The hero continued to provoke the enemy. Nothing scared him. The bandit leader, seeing the treasure, immediately rushed towards it and forgot about his enemy. Borgo noticed a piece of bloody armor among all this gold, which he immediately put on. The leader was completely covered in armor. He was ready to fight the enemy. The young man was not bothered by the enemy's madness. He watched what was happening from afar. Borgo did not know the name of the place where he was, and the statue of the goddess that was behind the young man turned into a demon. A miser who is unable to resist temptation must pay for it. The statue's words made Borgo laugh, because greed is what he lives by. Without it, he would not have reached such heights. The statue punished the miser, Borgo, who experienced the power of the goddess Ismokan. Borgo has been cursed by Ismokan, allowing him to use all items in the Hall of Restraint without limitation. Now the bandit leader's physical strength has increased significantly. Borgo has become Ismokan's ghost and is now under her control. The distraught captain suddenly began to attack Oliver, throwing a spear at him, hoping to kill his opponent with one blow. Using his new skill of insight, the young man manages to react and dodge the blow. Borgo is not going to stop there. He continues the attack and approaches the young man with lightning speed. Oliver calls on his guard, Jamal's shadow, to protect him, and a battle between the two giants begins. The first thing Jamal does is assess his enemy. He is disappointed that his opponent does not even have control over his own body. Borgo blamed the snowman for what was happening. He was angry and wanted to feel his blood on his hands. Jamal couldn't allow this to happen, so he held back his opponent's impulse. The shadow was larger than the ghost of Ismokan, and it seemed as if Jamal had no difficulty repelling the enemy's blows. Jamal strikes Borgo and sends him flying into the wall, dealing heavy damage to his opponent. It seemed that Borgo could no longer fight, but the statue ordered him to defend the hall. Therefore, Borgo, already completely wounded, rises to his feet and prepares for a new attack. Oliver didn't like what was happening. He didn't expect such a protracted fight. Jamal continued to attack his opponent. He wanted to tear him to shreds so that the enemy could no longer get up. The fight between the two giants continued. They attacked each other and each of them tried to tear apart his enemy. Borgo uses treasure control. Connection to the restraint hall is activated. Oliver noticed Borgo's actions and therefore warned his shadow of the danger. Borgo's attack damage was doubled as his ability. Mortal Strike was activated. The blow was so strong that Jamal was sent flying straight into the wall. Having defeated Oliver's servant, the enemy approached him, and now the Shadow Summoner was left alone. Oliver looked straight into the face of his opponent. He did not think that he had already lost. Borgo had already struck Oliver, but the young man did not move from his place. He had a clear plan which he followed. Jamal was not yet defeated, and as soon as he saw that his master was being attacked, he stood up and repelled the enemy's attack. Jamal not only fought his opponent, he also brought him down mentally with his harsh language. The orc is going to show his enemy what fear is and causes an earthquake. Although the body was not entirely his, the anger was very real. He thirsted for the blood of the enemy. Jamal beat Borgo with such force that his opponent was bleeding and could no longer fight. This wasn't enough for the orc. He forced his opponent to stand up to continue the fight. Borgo didn't want to lose the fight. He wanted to destroy the orc, so he kept getting up. The orc was surprised by such a desire from his enemy. Usually people begged for mercy when they saw him. Their fight continued for some time. They were both already dead, but they fought as if they were putting their lives on the line. Jamal eventually lands a punch on Borg and sends him straight into the wall, leaving the defeated opponent unable to rise. The wild orc stands firmly on his feet and declares his victory. The bandit leader did not understand how he could be defeated. He did not believe in his defeat, but he could no longer get up. Oliver looks at his shadow and feels a sense of pride. He is glad that he made Jamal his own. Jamal grabbed his opponent by the head and began to squeeze it, at which point Borgo began to beg for mercy. But the orc was not merciful. He made his enemy feel fear, and in one moment crushed his head with one hand. The task is completed. Oliver received the achievement, Anger Slayer, and the title Ghost Slayer, as well as an additional reward. Looking at Jamal, Oliver understood his full strength. It was no wonder he was considered the strongest of the Stonefang leaders. The gods who watched the orcs fight were delighted with him. Now they are not only fans of Oliver, but also fans of the orc. Having completed the task, the young man is going to open the chest with an additional reward. After opening the chest, the snowman receives the highest reward, Ismokan's gift. Suddenly, the goddess's statue activated, and because the snowman resisted the temptation to possess the treasure, which is a sign of strong will, Ismokan granted the hero another additional reward.